What's the most fricked up thing someone has told you about themselves after barely getting to know them? I used to work at an animal shelter and we had several people who would come volunteer to help out. One of the women who came there on a regular basis went to lunch with me. She was such a sweet woman, a little older than I was at the time. She proceeded to tell me that she used to go to the park and give old men blowjobs because she felt sorry for them. WTF. At 10 o'clock at night, I was at a rest stop and a guy came up to me and asked, how would you like to save a life? Tell me a joke and I may not kill myself. Whoa, you got emotionally mugged. I, 25F at the time, was at A&E in the UK. I got discharged and was waiting for my taxi outside. This buff shirtless dude, covered in tattoos, they were decent too, emo, comes over and asks for a light. I bought a Zippo for novelty so I obliged. We got to talking and he told me how he had just got out of prison after serving a life sentence for killing his father. After his father murdered his baby sister, had his records on him and everything. He was at the hospital as he was diabetic and had experienced an issue of some sort after being released. I have no expertise here. I have never feared and respected a man so much in my life. I bought him a pint after my taxi decided it wouldn't be arriving. Decent bloke. We still speak 9 years later. My sophomore year in college, a girl who I had a group project with told me that her first sexual experience was getting tag teamed by a couple of guys while she was in high school. I just told her, wow, that's pretty intense. She told me that she loved it and then I changed the subject. Until that point nothing sexual had come up in the conversation. Sound like she was testing the waters. I sat next to this quiet kid in my Spanish class. He was awkward and had a subtle speech impediment. One day, I tried to spark conversation with him and he told me that he considered murdering his parents. Guess he really did not want to talk with you. Worked. Randomly met a fellow motorcycler at a gas station at 2 AM. Told me he was going to confront his wife and her lover. Not right then, just in general. Then we rode the last 100 miles to St. Louis because he happened to be going the same way. I hope you didn't keep going on your way to his wife's house. My manager at my job in high school decided to tell us about her suicide attempt on my very first day. She was like, one day, I decided to take some pills and end it all. I grabbed a pill bottle out of my mom's cabinet and took a handful without even looking at what it was and then laid down to die. I was so surprised to wake up in the morning perfectly fine. Confused, I checked the bottle to see what I had taken. Yeah, it was estrogen. I can only imagine the awkward silence from that story and how it ended. I was seated next to a quiet kid on a high school band bus to a football game. He'd been in my band class for years, but I had never really spoken to him. He was the type who didn't fit into anything at school that I ever saw. I resolved to get to know him a bit and open up a conversation since we were going to be sitting by each other for a few hours. It was like a dam burst. That dude talked for the whole trip. At one point, he told me that his mom was really unhappy with his stepdad but couldn't afford to divorce him. And then he told me that his stepdad would get drunk and beat him with a stick. But he wasn't sure if his mom was also getting beaten and that scared him. There was a brief pause before he said, I never told anyone that before. Then he changed the subject completely. I must have been 17 or so. It shook me. Like, obviously I was old enough to know that sort of thing happens, but too sheltered to think it happened to anyone I knew. I told my parents about it. Seemed the right thing to do. I don't know what happened from there. He and I never really spoke of it again. I just looked him up on Facebook, though. Looks like he's done really well for himself. I'm sure he appreciated your kindness. Happy that he is doing well for himself. My wife loves to tell this story. Her first day at a new company, she was to meet another employee who would show her around the office. She met her in the lobby and on the elevator ride up to the office she proceeded to tell my wife how her husband has gained some weight and she is considering starting an office affair with a co-worker who is really into fitness and has muscles. Apparently she made a gesture where she fanned herself while saying muscles. Like literally, my wife met this lady 5 minutes earlier for the first time in the lobby and she is already unloading all this stuff on her. I was doing my practice in a hospital. They brought a young man in the neuro clinic. He was my first patient. He was around 30 and he had fallen from a tree while working. He turned out to have a complicated neurological condition that had nothing to do with his fall. He was also diagnosed with severe depression. He was in there for months and no one ever visited him. The only time he felt a bit better was when I visited him and did some tests to him. He said, "It's nice when you come and make me play with the colored toys and make me draw things." One day he was looking out of the window. When I came in, he looked me dead in the eye and told me, if the windows didn't have protective bars, I'd jump right out. It was the first time I'd heard such thing and I remember it ever since. It's truly horrible how many people with neurological disabilities or mental disabilities just get abandoned as soon as the family can get away with it. Co-worker took out a client for a business lunch at a small town restaurant. He asks the waitress, "How are you?" to be polite. She proceeds to go on a 5-minute spiel about how terrible her ex-husband is and how he's ruining her life and how she feels like crap because of it. After she finishes, takes their order and leaves, the customer says, "So you must know her pretty well, only well enough to say hi in passing." "Oh, so then that was just as awkward for you as it was for me then?" Yes it was. This feels like a Parks and Rec scene. Like it a lot. I picked up a hitchhiker once that told me he left California after his wife died because the cops were asking too many questions. I dropped him off in the next town and he paid me with a beer and we parted way. Some guy next to me on the bus once went into a long elaborate story about how he burned his house down for insurance money like 3 weeks prior. I wouldn't have believed it if his hands didn't have massive burn scarring. LOL. Dude probably just had scared hands and makes up a new story whenever someone stares at them. Used to ride the bus every day to get to one of my first jobs. Old dude on it had a removable section of his face. I probably heard about 30 different versions of how it happened when he caught kids staring. Had to do a course and the trainer arrives, introduced himself to the small class of maybe 4 or 5 people and asked a bit about each of us. He then told us his wife had died 2 years ago and he tried to kill himself. I felt horrible for him, but he seemed genuinely happy with where his life was. I ended up staying back after class and having a beer with him at the bar. He was a really cool guy. I hope he is still happy. Sometimes telling people about the horrible crap you went through or are going through helps them understand where you are at in life. Worked with a new girl one night. Literally didn't know her name. She told me about every sexual experience of her life. That she wanted to try anal, but kept having flashbacks to her uncle raping her. How her mom would invite guys over for a train when she was a teen and a crap ton more. Bonus point. She turned me into HR because she told her fiancé that she told me all this. He freaked out, so she lied and told them I harassed her. Not sure if this is fricked up. Definitely nowhere near what I have read on this thread already. Met this dude in college when he moved into the dorm. Goofy looking redneck kid from the San Antonio area. I'm getting to know him when I notice his Spice Girls CD. This was like 2003, and I commented on it. He then goes into this long story of how he was at the Walmart in San Antonio, looking at the CDs in that store and just happened to have bumped into Ginger Spice, who invited his underage butt into the tour bus that no one had noticed. And he lost his virginity to all the Spice Girls at once. My thought was, thank you for this story. I know instantly that I can never trust or believe anything you ever tell me again. It's been almost 20 years and I still can't believe that was something he said in the first 5 minutes of meeting me. If you wanna be my lover, you gotta get with my friends. Update. Thank you for the awards, everyone. I also wanted to tell everyone how I found my PTSD treatment 10 years ago. I called the suicide hotline. I informed him that I wasn't suicidal but that I wanted long-term help cause I couldn't control my thoughts. And even this time around I did the same thing because they had a list of resources and they were even able to find one that worked with my insurance. Instead of calling around and getting told that they were extreme wait list, they knew who was open. I met a man at an airport once. I was there on layover, so I had some time to kill. I bought a book from the bookstore and went and sat at what my gate was supposed to be. I was 21 at the time maybe. It was kind of crowded and there was a man in his 40s sitting next to me. We chatted for a bit. I was just entering a program for my PTSD. I can't remember how the conversation got started, but we ended up talking about mental illness, life, rebuilding after said trauma, and how sometimes we inactively choose or actively choose to remain in terrible situations. He mentioned to me how he was repeatedly molested from ages 8 to 13 by his Catholic priest. When his parents found out, his dad beat the priest until he had to be hospitalized. The moment him ended up moving with the other siblings to a new state, and how he didn't recognize for over 10 years that his extremely rebellious teenage years, his drug use, his drugged up relationships, was because he was not processing the past. He gave me a great bit of advice that I ended up using. Sometimes what you really need is a change of scenery. He talked about how in his mid-20s he got therapy, and once therapy ended he moved. He packed what little he had and moved. Worked 2 jobs to put himself through college. Now on a few businesses. It is much happier and successful in his life. He made it a point to tell me that if you run from your problems they'll always catch you. However, if you confront your problems you're then free to go wherever you want. That was almost 10 years ago, and it made me really stick through therapy, and I took his advice and I moved. It was amazing. For a long while it was just what I needed. Unfortunately, isolation is putting me back into a pre-therapy mindset, and not too healthy, and I'm going back for more mental health work. But I still think of that layover I had at O'Hare Airport. Hang in there, bud. You've conquered the illness once. You can do it again. My boss at the time had hired an older woman who was re-entering the workforce. He wanted to fire her the first day when she couldn't even complete the legal paperwork. Maybe 20 minutes for the slowest readers. In 8 hours. He quickly lost his patience training her, so he pawned her off on me. Before the end of the first day I trained her, she failed at things as I explained them to her, cried, called me a bully for trying to train her too quickly. She reported me to the boss and she wanted to report me to HR for creating a hostile environment. I was actually out of town at the time, but he managed to spook her enough by asking if we should just call this hiring a mistake and have her and the company mutually part ways. She straightened up pretty quick apparently. When I came back a few days later, she's better and more eager to learn. As we are leaving for the day, her husband is waiting for her in the parking lot with her teenage son in the back seat. I pull out in my car after they do, and the entire time her son is turned around in the backseat smiling at me through the rear windshield. The following day she tells me her son has a huge crush on me now. He thinks I'm so hot and he's going along for the ride tonight so he can see me again. Then this woman, who I have known for 3 days, tells me all of her teenage minor child's physical stats, including the size of his penis. Why a mother knows the size of her son's penis I do not wish to know. I actually had to remind this woman that I was more than a decade older than her minor child, to which she sort of laughed and said he'd be older soon enough. She did not end up working with us for long. I was temping at an office and the trainer told me about her ex. He was cheating on me, not just with one woman but many different women. That's terrible, I replied, thinking we'd move on. Nope. No, it was worse than that. He filmed himself shagging the women, and then streamed the compilation of his conquests onto our TV, for me to watch. I was unsure of what to say, and after a couple of minutes of me being quiet she then said, when it was Valentine's Day a few days later, he gave me a present. He let me start unwrapping the present. In Pass the Parcel style, each layer had a used condom that he'd used to shag the women in his compilation video. To say I was sat there not knowing what the frick to say is an understatement. I'm just sitting here thinking, why would one keep unwrapping that present after the first layer? Met an old friend's girlfriend one day. Well, he was hardly a friend and more of like a friend of a friend. We hung out one day. His girlfriend was with us. First time meeting her, and that night she randomly sent me nudes and said that her boyfriend wanted to have a threesome with her and myself. I kindly declined. If they asked me today, I'd hop on that faster than a frog onto a lily pad. I love the way you included your current stance on the subject as well in the story. For that, I enjoy this answer the most on this thread. Met a woman who worked child care. She told me all about how difficult it was working with abused boys and how she got too close to one and had sexual feelings. Showed me a picture and said anyone who meets him thinks he is really nice and not to judge him on looks. Then the barman came back with my drink and I left. That was the entirety of conversation with a very drunk and probably crappy social worker. Yeah, that really sounds like pedo talk. There. That woman should not be allowed to be around children, much less vulnerable ones. This girl started talking to me, and everything was sunshine until she kept going on about how she would plan a murder, and how often she blackmails people. I promptly ended the conversation and haven't talked to them since. Oh god, that sounds horrible. Not technically the question, but my mother was an avid oversharer. It wasn't until I was older that I started to realize just how uncomfortable she would make people. There's a lot of stuff she would pass off as normal, or even joke about, that was really weird. The first time I met a friend in person from online, she spent the entire time telling his mom about how I was maybe sexually assaulted but she wasn't sure, and then about her own sexual experiences. Within a week of moving here, my husband had learned about her abortions, how she'd lost her virginity, how I was probably harmed as a kid but who knows, about my freaking brother's sex life, about how he's not having good sex with his wife, and so many more things that he really didn't need to know. Just started a new job, said good morning to a lad there. His reply, I've just found out my lass has been getting backscuttled behind my back. I didn't even know his name. An old man asked me if I knew when the next bus would arrive, and we ended up getting into a nice conversation that somehow led to him telling me about his daughter being in an abusive relationship with a guy who made her move far away from him and his family so they couldn't help her. We were both crying by the time the bus arrived. God, this one made me the saddest for some reason. That guy had to feel so hopeless. Thanks for being a bro and listening to him. That's so rough. I remember the first friend I made at my new high school when I was 14 so vividly. Just as we were walking out of the classroom where we had just met, she turns around and cheerfully chimes, "Oh, by the way, I'm a vampire." Yes, Twilight had just come out. That entire school was so weird. I remember another girl noticed I had cut myself shaving and insisted on putting a band-aid on for me as she muttered things like, "You have no idea how difficult this is for me." Yes, she also claimed to be a vampire. Small towns, man. I've got second-hand embarrassment reading this. First night at my first base right out of tech school in the USAF. Hi, my name is Mike and I'm into hardcore S&M. Still had to share a room with him a few nights. Hope you slept with one eye open. My favorite question to ask new colleagues was, "So, what do you do in your free time?" First person I asked, "A crap ton of drugs." They sound fun. On a first date with a girl, she leaned in and whispered, "I fricked 2 guys last night." Obviously consecutively, not at the same time. I'm not a W. After that, we had a nice, perfectly normal conversation until she had a couple of drinks. At that point, she leaned back in and said, "I'm completely shaved. Do you want to see?" and promptly lifted her skirt to show it. When she did, she said, "I never wear underwear. They get in the way." After I talked to a few friends, including the one who set us up, they all said that she was desperate to be the center of attention and slightly crazy. Slightly. Apparently I have a face that says confess your darkest secrets to me. In high school I had a lab partner start off by saying she's in a new foster home and she'll be a great partner cause they basically let her do her own thing so she'll always be available to study. Not knowing where this would go, I asked if that was different than her previous home. What I got in response was just an avalanche of horror, including, "At least this place didn't watch me shower." Only thing I could think of after was to ask if she was okay. Do I need to say something to someone? She did turn out to be an excellent lab partner though. In college I had 2 girls tell me about their sexual assaults pretty close to meeting them. Those threw me for a loop and I had to ask my female friends, is there something I throwing out there that say I'm dangerous? They all said it's the opposite, I make people feel comfortable. Had a coworker ask me to help her submit something to a radio station contest. I got to the part about her formerly working in P and escorting cause her daughter needed to eat. Had to tap out on that and suggested maybe she just come over and borrow my computer and submit this herself. I feel this on a spiritual level. I too have the therapist face. Vlad the locksmith. We were doing a vehicle recovery job together. Just met the guy and we were talking on the way to the vehicle across town. I mentioned, "Yeah, my wife is pregnant and we are having a kid in 2 months. He light up. Vlad says his sort of girlfriend is pregnant too. Well, she's not really his girlfriend but his brother's very recent ex-girlfriend. But he's mad because he thinks it was her that gave him an STD. We get to the vehicle and I mention it's a bad neighborhood. He agrees and pulls out his gun. Don't worry bro, I got your back. Long story short, we dip out with about 5 dudes looking pretty mad in the rear view mirror. Vlad sounds like a decent guy to hang out with. Was flying out of China for Christmas I think, and an expat guy asked me for a smoke at the airport. Turns out he was being deported, handcuffed and with armed guards. He told me it was cause he was a med student and he and his buddies had been stealing pharmaceuticals from the training hospital. No more med school for him. Wow, I forgot of all the odd stories I've had with smokers or people asking to bum cigarettes. So glad I quit. I was training a new co-worker. Literally the first day I met him and our first conversation, he told me that he walked out on his wife and kids 30 years ago because he was a raging alcoholic, but now he had turned his life around and reconnected with one of his adult sons and was very actively a part of his grandson's life. He talked about his grandson constantly every single day. His other son refused contact with him, but he understood the reasoning and didn't fault him for it. He was such a nice guy. Killed by a drunk driver a year after I met him. I met the random person at a party once who ended up having a deep conversation about her mental and sexual abuse as a child, how it led to her developing borderline personality disorder as an adult. She told me that she somehow felt that I was in tune with other people's emotions without the need for vocal interaction, which attracted broken people to confide in me. I can't deny it because it kinda clicked a whole lot of situations and conversations I've had into place. A drunk guy at a bar once told me that I have the aura of somebody who knows kung fu. I think that was the main thing preventing him from attacking me. I don't know any martial arts though. Drunk girl, 17-18. At a party let me know that she'd stopped giving her dad BJs. I never saw her again and never found out if he got busted. The number of women that come up with being raped by family members is honestly very worrying. I remember a girl that in school was kinda weird, seems like she was raped by the dad and granddad since she was 4/5. In high school, I once briefly met this odd dude who wanted to join me and my friend's gaming club. He then proceeded to brag about all the keyboards he'd broken over his knee. Kind of a red flag, but I originally let it go as him trying to act tough to impress us. Next time I saw him, he stopped me in the hall and proceeded to tell me in great detail about frog dissection and how much he enjoyed doing it. Mind you, I'd only met him twice at that point. I noped the heck out of there and avoided him the rest of the year. That him and his twin brother were originally going to be 2/3 of a set of triplets, but his father took a baseball bat to his mother when she was pregnant with him, his brother, and apparently his unborn sister. Crap, that's just vile. I didn't even realize there could be partial miscarriages. Actually, I think this might be the first time I've ever put any thought into the implications of miscarrying triplets. A guy shouted sex with dogs is good for you at me after we looked at each other from 50 feet away on the sidewalk. 7 years later and it's still living in my head. Mission accomplished. Before our first date was over, this guy told me about ending his engagement cause his fiancée cheated at a party, and then he opened up about his history of emotional traumas. Somehow, that didn't scare me off, and we've been married for 4 years now. My fiancé basically extended our first date by 4 hours just by chatting. Went from "so what do you like most about your job" to "let's see what our top 5 kinks are." I kept my previous phone just to savor those first few months worth of texts, and maybe those results. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.